She didn't smile, she didn't cry, she didn't even look at the jury that had just saved her from a life sentence. When the gavel came down at the Old Bailey, Evelyn Cross simply smoothed the skirt of her cream Givenchy suit, turned on her heel, and walked out of the courtroom into the London rain. The press called her the Ice Widow. They said she got away with murder. But 48 hours later, a paparazzo's long-lens camera caught something that changed everything. Evelyn wasn't in mourning. She was stepping onto the deck of the Obsidian, a super yacht belonging to a man who was supposed to be her dead husband's worst enemy. This isn't just a story about a murder trial. It's a story about a long con of billion-dollar betrayal and what really happened in the master bedroom of Sterling Manor. November 14, 2024. The air inside courtroom number 1 at the Old Bailey was so thick with tension you could taste the metallic tang of adrenaline. The gallery was packed. Reporters from The Times, The Guardian, and every major American network squeezed onto the wooden benches. They were there for the finale of what had been dubbed the trial of the century. In the dock stood Evelyn Cross. At 32 years old, she was arguably the most photographed woman in the United Kingdom. Her husband, Lord Alistair Sterling, the shipping magnate and aristocrat, had been found dead 6 months prior, foaming at the mouth in his study, a glass of vintage scotch laced with arsenic shattering on the floor beside him. The prosecution had painted a picture of a classic black widow. They claimed Evelyn, a former art curator from a modest background in Chicago, had seduced the aging Lord Sterling, married him for his title and his fortune, and then disposed of him when he threatened to cut her out of the will. They had receipts for jewelry, whispers of arguments, and the damning fact that she was the last person to see him alive. But the defense led by the ruthless barrister Anthony Hightower had dismantled the timeline. They argued suicide. They argued corporate espionage. They argued that Lord Sterling, a man with many enemies, had been targeted by a rival cartel. The jury foreman, a gray-haired man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, stood up. In the matter of the Crown versus Evelyn Cross on the charge of murder, how do you find the defendant? The silence that followed lasted only 3 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Not guilty. The gallery erupted. The judge pounded his gavel, demanding order, but all eyes were on Evelyn. This is where the story breaks from the script. Usually the acquitted defendant collapses in relief. They hug their lawyer, they weep, they look up to the heavens. Evelyn Cross did none of that. Witnesses closest to the dock later reported that her heart rate didn't seem to spike. Her expression remained perfectly flat, the same icy, unreadable mask she had worn for the entire 6-week trial. She didn't look at the jury to thank them. She didn't look at the weeping family of her late husband in the front row. She simply nodded once to Anthony Hightower. She didn't shake his hand. She picked up her Hermes clutch, smoothed her blazer, and walked toward the exit. Outside, the scene was chaotic. A wall of photographers and rain awaited her. As the heavy doors swung open, the flashbulbs blinded the gray London afternoon. Questions were shouted like gunfire. Evelyn, did you do it? How does it feel to get away with it? Do you have a message for Alistair's children? Evelyn paused on the top step. For a split second, the cameras caught her eyes. They weren't fearful. They were cold, almost mocking. She put on a pair of oversized black sunglasses despite the rain and descended the stairs. A black Range Rover with tinted windows screeched to the curb. A security guard, a mountain of a man known only as Gower, shoved the press aside. Evelyn slid into the back seat. The door slammed shut. She had left the courtroom without a single word. No statement. No denial. No proclamation of innocence. Most people thought she was heading to her penthouse in Kensington to hide. They thought she would lay low, wait for the insurance money, and disappear into the English countryside. They were wrong. By the time the evening news was airing her acquittal, Evelyn Cross wasn't in Kensington. She wasn't even in London. She had vanished. And the next time the world saw her, the narrative of the grieving widow would be shattered forever. To understand the gravity of what happened next, we have to look at who died. Lord Alistair Sterling was not just a rich man, he was an institution. He was 72, a baron, and the CEO of Sterling Maritime, a logistics company that moved 10% of the world's freight. But Alistair was also a man of secrets. During the trial, the prosecution tried to protect his reputation, painting him as a benevolent philanthropist who had fallen in love with a beautiful younger American woman. But those who moved in the elite circles of Mayfair knew better. Alistair was a brute. Rumors had circulated for years about his temper. His first wife had died in a riding accident in 1998 that was never fully investigated. His children from that marriage, Beatrice and Edward, were known to despise their father, though they happily lived off his allowance. When Alistair met Evelyn in 2021 at a gallery opening in New York, it was a whirlwind. They were married within 3 months. The tabloids called it a fairy tale. Evelyn was beautiful, intelligent, and seemingly devoted. But 3 months before the murder, the tone of the marriage allegedly shifted. During the trial, the prosecution introduced a witness, a maid named Sarah. Sarah testified that she heard shouting matches behind the closed doors of the study. She claimed she heard Alistair scream, "You are nothing without me, I bought you, and I can break you." They also introduced a diary entry found in Evelyn's bedside table. It was a single line written in elegant cursive. "The cage is golden, but the air is poisonous." The prosecution used this to argue motive. She was trapped. She was abused. She wanted out, and the prenuptial agreement stated she would get nothing if she divorced him. But if he died, she inherited a third of the estate, a sum of roughly £400 million. It seemed like an open and shut case of greed. So how did she get off? Barrister Anthony Hightower played a dangerous game. He introduced the shadow. The defense argued that Alistair Sterling was involved in moving more than just consumer goods. They hinted at arms dealing. They hinted that Alistair had crossed a Russian oligarch named Viktor Karkaroff. Hightower presented a forensic accountant who testified that 3 days before his death, Alistair had transferred £5 million to an untraceable offshore account in the Cayman Islands. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Hightower had bellowed, "Evelyn Cross is not a killer. She is a convenient scapegoat for a man who played with fire and got burned. Alistair Sterling wasn't murdered by his wife. He was executed by his business partners." It was enough to create reasonable doubt. The jury couldn't convict, but the public wasn't convinced. In the court of public opinion, Evelyn was a witch, a gold digger who had poisoned an old man. When she entered that black Range Rover, the world wanted to see her suffer. They wanted to see her isolated and afraid. Instead, the investigation that followed her acquittal revealed a level of planning that suggested Evelyn Cross was not a victim of circumstance. She was a grandmaster playing 4D chess. Police sources later leaked that when they tracked the Range Rover, they found it abandoned in a parking garage near Heathrow Airport just 2 hours after the verdict. Inside the car there was no Evelyn. There was only her cream Givenchy suit neatly folded on the back seat and the Hermes clutch. Inside the clutch there was no phone, no wallet, just a single playing card. The Queen of Spades. The timeline of the next 24 hours is crucial. It reconstructs the missing period that baffled Scotland Yard. While the British press was staking out her Kensington apartment, Evelyn Cross was already airborne. She didn't fly commercial. She didn't use her own passport. According to a leak from a private aviation firm at Biggin Hill, a private airport just outside London, a woman matching Evelyn's description boarded a Gulfstream G650 at 5:45 p.m. on the day of the verdict. But she looked different. The blonde bob was gone, replaced by a sleek jet-black wig. The cream suit was replaced by designer leisure wear. She was listed on the manifest as Vanessa Thorne. The flight plan was filed for Nice, France, the heart of the French Riviera. This is where the story takes a sharp turn toward the bizarre. Who paid for the jet? The charter cost for a G650 from London to Nice is roughly £25,000. Evelyn's assets were frozen pending the outcome of the probate court. She shouldn't have had access to a penny. The credit card used to book the flight didn't belong to Evelyn. It didn't belong to her lawyer. It belonged to a shell company registered in Delaware, Orion Holdings. Journalists later dug into Orion Holdings. It was a ghost company. No employees, no physical office, just a P.O. box and a bank account that had received a deposit of $10 million 2 weeks before the trial even started. Someone was funding Evelyn's defense and her escape. Someone with incredibly deep pockets. The jet touched down in Nice at 8:30 p.m. local time. A helicopter was waiting on the tarmac. Evelyn or Vanessa didn't even go through the main terminal. She transferred directly from the jet to the helicopter. The chopper took off heading south over the Mediterranean Sea. For 12 hours she was off the grid. The media in London was running stories about a potential suicide, speculating that the pressure had gotten to her. They were dredging the Thames. They were checking hospitals. But the truth was far more glamorous and far more damning. On the morning of November 16th, a freelance paparazzo named Jean-Luc was patrolling the waters off the coast of Monaco in a small Zodiac boat. He was looking for movie stars. The Cannes Film Festival was months away, but the super-rich often anchored their yachts in the deep waters near Antibes to avoid taxes and prying eyes. Jean-Luc spotted a vessel that everyone on the Riviera knew. The Obsidian. It was a 300-foot mega-yacht painted matte black with a military-grade hull. It looked more like a destroyer than a pleasure craft. It had a helipad, a submarine bay, and radar jamming technology. It belonged to Sebastian Vane. If Alistair Sterling was old money and shipping crates, Sebastian Vane was new money, data, and ruthless aggression. He was an American tech billionaire, 38 years old, the founder of Vane Systems, a private intelligence contractor that worked with the CIA and MI6. He was handsome in a sharp, dangerous way, dark hair, piercing blue eyes, and a reputation for destroying his competitors. And he was Alistair Sterling's sworn enemy. 5 years ago, Vane had tried to buy Sterling Maritime. Alistair had publicly humiliated him, calling him a boy playing with grown-up toys and blocking the sale. Vane had vowed revenge. So when Jean-Luc pointed his long lens at the deck of the Obsidian, he expected to see Sebastian Vane with a supermodel. Instead, he saw a woman in a white bikini sipping champagne leaning against the railing. She turned her head and the sunlight hit her face. Jean-Luc froze. He knew that face. Everyone in the world knew that face. It was Evelyn Cross. But she wasn't alone. Walking up behind her was Sebastian Vane. He didn't look like a stranger. He didn't look like a savior giving sanctuary to a refugee. The photos Jean-Luc snapped that day would sell for $500,000. They showed Sebastian wrapping his arms around Evelyn's waist. They showed him whispering in her ear. And for the first time in 6 months, they showed Evelyn Cross smiling. It wasn't a smile of relief. It was the smile of a predator who had just successfully eaten her prey. When those photos hit the internet, the narrative exploded. The poor widow theory died instantly. This wasn't a woman fleeing a wrongful accusation. This looked like a conspiracy. Had Evelyn Cross and Sebastian Vane plotted the murder of Alistair Sterling together? Had she been a Trojan horse sent into Sterling's house by his rival to take him down from the inside? But as the world screamed adultery and conspiracy, a source from inside Vane Systems reached out to a journalist at the Washington Post. They sent a single encrypted file. The subject line read, Project Aesop. The contents of that file would reveal that the relationship between Evelyn and Sebastian wasn't romantic. It wasn't a sordid affair. It was a mission. Evelyn Cross wasn't an art curator. And Sebastian Vane wasn't just a tech bro. The story was about to get much darker. Washington, D.C., November 17th. The rain in the capital was different from the rain in London. It was colder, sharper. Harrison Peele sat in a booth at the back of the old Ebbett Grill nursing a lukewarm coffee. Peele was a relic of a bygone era of journalism, a man who had exposed the Iran-Contra dealings in the Panama Papers. He didn't trust digital leaks. He liked paper. But the drive he had received in his mailbox that morning left him no choice. He inserted the encrypted USB into his air-gapped laptop. He typed in the password provided in the anonymous email Ozymandias. The screen flickered and a directory of folders appeared. At the top was the header, Vein Systems, Classified, Level 5, Clearance. Peel clicked on the folder labeled Project ESOP. What he read over the next 3 hours made his blood run cold. It fundamentally rewrote the history of the last 3 years. The documents revealed that Evelyn Cross did not exist. The woman the world knew as the Ice Widow was born Elena Vance. She was a former deep-cover operative for MI6, specializing in corporate infiltration. In 2018, she had been stationed in Beirut monitoring a weapons trafficking ring. The operation had gone catastrophically wrong. Her handler was executed. Her team was compromised. Elena barely escaped with her life suffering burns on her left shoulder and a disavowal from the British government. The man who had sold out her team to the local warlords, a silent partner in the weapons deal. A man listed in the intelligence files only as the Baron. It took Elena 2 years to identify the Baron. It was Lord Alastair Sterling. Sterling wasn't just moving freight. The documents on Peel's screen detailed a darker ledger. Sterling Maritime was the primary logistics provider for a shadow economy moving chemical precursors to rogue states smuggling blood diamonds out of conflict zones, and most damningly selling the identities of Western intelligence agents to the highest bidder. Elena Vance wanted justice, but the British government couldn't touch Sterling. He was too powerful, too connected to the House of Lords. Enter Sebastian Vane. Vein Systems had been trying to dismantle Sterling's monopoly for a decade. Vane knew about Sterling's illegal dealings, but lacked the hard evidence to destroy him. He needed someone inside, someone who could get past the security, past the lawyers, and into the master bedroom where Sterling kept his physical ledger. He found Elena Vance living off the grid in Zurich. The file contained a transcript of their first meeting in 2020. Vane, I can give you a new face, a new name, and a backstory that checks out. I can put you in the same room as him. Vance. And then would I kill him, Vane? No. Death is too easy. If he dies, his son takes over and the business continues. I want to burn it down. I want his legacy destroyed. I want his secrets. You get me the ledger and we bury him. Vance. I don't work for billionaires, Mr. Vane. Vane. You don't work for me. We have a common enemy. He killed your team. He cost me $1 billion. We are merely aligned. Harrison Peel sat back in the booth, his heart hammering. The marriage to Alastair Sterling hadn't been a romance. It hadn't even been a gold-digging scheme. It was an infiltration mission. The abuse allegations, the screaming matches, the unhappy wife narrative, calculated theater. Evelyn or Elena had staged the arguments to create a public record of discord. She needed the world to believe she was an emotional wreck, so that when Sterling died, everyone would look at the wife and miss the real theft. Peel scrolled to the section titled, The Exit Strategy. The plan was never for Evelyn to get away cleanly. The plan was to get arrested. It was audacious. By getting arrested for murder, the police would seize the house. They would freeze the assets. Sterling's criminal partners would panic and go underground. While Evelyn sat in prison awaiting trial, Vane's hackers would use the chaos to penetrate Sterling's now unguarded digital servers. But there was one detail in the file that didn't add up. The file stated target acquisition the black book. Extraction method non-lethal. Non-lethal. Peel reread the line. Vane had ordered Evelyn to steal the book and expose Sterling. He had specifically ordered her not to kill him. So who put the arsenic in the scotch if Evelyn was a highly trained spy following a strict plan she wouldn't deviate? Killing Sterling jeopardized the mission. It risked a life sentence. Peel opened the final folder. It was a surveillance log from inside Sterling Manor dated the night of the murder. The audio file was corrupted, But the metadata showed a third person had entered the study at 11:45 p.m. Evelyn had left at 11:30 p.m. Someone else had come in after her, someone who finished the job. Peel realized with a jolt of terror that Evelyn Cross wasn't just a fake widow boarding a yacht. She was a loose end. She thought she had won. She thought she was safe with Sebastian Vane. But if Vane had the evidence that someone else killed Sterling, why hadn't he used it to clear her name instantly? Why let her go through the trial unless Vane wanted her desperate? Unless Vane was the one who sent the third person? Peel grabbed his phone. He had to publish. He had to get this out before the hunters closed in. But as he hit dial on his editor's number, the screen of his phone went black. A message appeared in green text. "Hello, Harrison. You're looking at files you shouldn't have. Stay where you are." Peel looked up. Through the rainy window of the restaurant, he saw two men in dark trench coats stepping out of a sedan. They weren't looking at the menu. They were looking at him. He grabbed the USB drive and ran toward the kitchen exit. The Mediterranean Sea off the coast of Corsica. November 17th. The obsidian cut through the water like a knife. On board, the atmosphere was far removed from the chaos Harrison Peel was facing in D.C. Evelyn Cross, now back to being Elena Vance, sat in the main stateroom. The interior of the yacht was a minimalist cathedral of chrome and black leather. It smelled of sea salt and expensive espresso. She was no longer wearing the white bikini. She was dressed in tactical gear, black cargo trousers, a fitted thermal shirt, and boots. She was stripping down a Glock 19 on the mahogany table, her movements precise and mechanical. Sebastian Vane stood by the panoramic window watching the horizon. He held a tablet in his hand. "We're clear of French territorial waters," Vane said, his voice smooth, lacking the jagged edge it held during business negotiations. "The press is still chasing their tails in London. They think you're in a nunnery in Spain." Evelyn didn't look up from the gun. "They'll figure it out. You let that photographer get too close, Sebastian. That was sloppy." Vane turned a smirk playing on his lips. "It wasn't sloppy. It was a signal. I wanted Sterling's associates to know you're with me. It flushes them out." Evelyn slammed the magazine into the pistol. The sound echoed in the silent room. She looked up and the ice widow was gone. In her place was a woman with eyes like flint. "I didn't agree to be your bait, Sebastian. I agreed to get the ledger. You have it. Now where is my payment, the new identity, the clean slate?" Vane walked over to the table. He poured himself a drink, not offering her one. "The ledger is complicated. You got the physical book, yes, but the encryption keys for his offshore accounts, they weren't in the safe." "They were," Evelyn said, her voice low. "I saw them. I photographed them. I uploaded them to your secure server 10 minutes before the police arrived." "The upload failed," Vane lied. Evelyn knew he was lying. She could see the micro-expression, the slight twitch in his jaw. She had been trained to read liars by the best interrogators in the world. She stood up, the gun hanging loosely at her side. "Don't play games with me. You have the money. You have the names of every corrupt politician Sterling owned. You just don't want to let me go." Vane sighed. He set his drink down. "You know too much, Elena. You know how the sausage is made. If I let you disappear, you're a liability. But I have a proposition. Stay. Work for me. Sterling was just the beginning. There are a dozen other oligarchs I want to take down. We make a good team." "I'm retired," she said coldly. "Transfer the funds. Prepare the helicopter." Vane's expression hardened. He tapped a button on his watch. Suddenly the electronic locks on the stateroom door engaged with a heavy thud. The lights dimmed to emergency red. "I was afraid you'd be difficult," Vane said. "You're not leaving, Elena. Not until I say you're done." Evelyn raised the gun, leveling it at his chest. "Open the door." "It's bulletproof glass, Elena, and my security team is just outside. You can shoot me, but you'll never get off this boat alive." The standoff was broken not by a gunshot, but by the ship's alarm system. A klaxon wailed a distinct piercing sound that meant collision imminent. The floor beneath them shuddered violently. Vane was thrown against the bar, crystal decanters shattering around him. Evelyn dropped to a crouch, balancing herself instantly. "What the hell was that?" Vane shouted, scrambling for his tablet. He pulled up the external camera feed. His face went pale. "It's not the police," Vane whispered. Evelyn moved to his side and looked at the screen. Approaching the Obsidian from the stern were 3 high-speed interceptor boats. They were painted matte gray, no flags, no markings. On the bow of the lead boat stood a man holding a megaphone, though he wasn't using it yet. Even through the grainy camera feed, Evelyn recognized the silhouette. The hulking frame. The bald head. It was Viktor Karkaroff, the Russian oligarch, Sterling's business partner, the man Sterling had stolen £5 million from just days before he died. "He found us," Evelyn said, her mind racing. "How did he find us?" Vane looked at her, genuine fear in his eyes for the first time. The photo. The paparazzi photo. It wasn't just the press who saw it. The ship shook again as a heavy caliber round impacted the hull. "They're boarding," Vane's head of security, a man named Gower, the same man who had driven Evelyn from the court, burst into the room via a side service door. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead. "Mr. Vane, they have RPGs. They've disabled the engines." Vane looked at Evelyn. The power dynamic had shifted in a second. He needed her. "Elena," Vane pleaded. "My security team is good, but they're corporate protection. Karkaroff has Spetsnaz mercenaries. You know how to fight these people." Evelyn looked at the man who had just tried to imprison her. She looked at the screen where the Russians were grappling hooks onto the lower deck. She had a choice. She could let Karkaroff kill Vane, but Karkaroff wouldn't stop there. He would torture her for the location of the money Sterling had hidden. She was trapped between a traitor and a butcher. Evelyn checked the chamber of her Glock. She grabbed an extra magazine from the table. "Unlock the armory," she commanded, her voice cutting through the panic. "What?" Vane asked. "Unlock the damn armory, Sebastian. If we want to survive the next 20 minutes, I need more than a handgun. And I need access to the ship's internal comms." Vane nodded frantically and typed a code into his tablet. "Done. Deck 2. Evelyn moved to the service door. She paused and looked back at Vane. "If we survive this," she said, "we are going to finish our conversation about my retirement. And if you lie to me again, I'll let the Russians have you." She slipped out into the corridor. The Obsidian was no longer a luxury yacht. It was a kill box. Evelyn moved silently down the hallway, the red emergency lights painting her skin in blood tones. She could hear heavy boots on the metal stairs above her. Shouts in Russian, the crack of automatic gunfire. She reached the stairwell leading to Deck 2. She peered around the corner. 2 mercenaries were guarding the hallway. They wore tactical vests and balaclavas. They were professional. Evelyn took a breath. She wasn't the Ice Widow anymore. She wasn't the victim. She was the hunter. She stepped out, firing 2 shots in rapid succession. Double taps. Precise. Lethal. The men dropped. Evelyn stepped over their bodies and grabbed an assault rifle from one of the fallen men. She checked the mag. Full. She tapped her ear, activating the comms Vane had linked to the ship's system. "Vane," she whispered. "I'm on Deck 2. Where are they headed?" Vane's voice came through shaking. "They're bypassing the bridge. They're heading for the server room, Deck 4. "The data," Evelyn realized. "They don't want us. They want the list of agents." If Karkaroff got that list, hundreds of undercover operatives around the world, people Evelyn used to work with, people she still cared about, would be executed. "I'm going down," Evelyn said. "Elena, that's suicide," Vane replied. "There are at least 20 of them." "Then I guess I'll have to be creative." Evelyn ran toward the engine room access. She remembered the layout of the ship. The Obsidian had a fire suppression system, halon gas. If she could trigger it manually in the lower decks, she could suffocate the fire team without firing a shot. But she had to get there before they breached the servers. She rounded a corner and slammed straight into a wall of muscle. A mercenary grabbed her by the throat, slamming her against the bulkhead. The rifle clattered to the floor. He was huge, smelling of tobacco and sweat. He raised a combat knife, aiming for her ribs. Evelyn gasped, her vision swimming. She kneed him in the groin, but he barely flinched. He tightened his grip, choking the life out of her. "Evelyn Cross," the man grunted in heavy English. "Mr. Karkaroff sends his regards." Her hand scrambled on her belt. She found the flare gun she had swiped from the emergency kit on the wall moments earlier. She didn't aim for him. She aimed for the sprinkler sensor above his head. Boom! The flare hit the sensor. The system didn't trigger water. It triggered the high-pressure foam dispersant meant for chemical fires. A blast of blinding white foam exploded into the corridor, filling the space instantly. The mercenary, blinded and confused, loosened his grip. Evelyn dropped to the floor, sweeping his legs. He fell hard. She didn't hesitate. A swift kick to the temple knocked him unconscious. She gasped for air, wiping the foam from her eyes. She retrieved her rifle. She was alive. But the night was just beginning. And deep in the bowels of the ship, something else was wrong. The ship was listing to the side. Karkaroff hadn't just boarded them. He had rigged explosives to the hull. The Obsidian was sinking. The Obsidian was dying. The great black beast of a yacht groaned as the structural integrity failed. The explosive charges set by Karkaroff's men had blown a hole in the starboard hull the size of a delivery van. The Mediterranean was pouring in thousands of gallons a second, dragging the billion-dollar vessel down by the stern. Inside the corridor of Deck 4, gravity had shifted. The floor was now tilted at a 20-degree angle. Elena Vance, formerly Evelyn Cross, used the incline to her advantage. She slid down the polished steel hallway, the assault rifle tucked tight against her shoulder, crashing into the doorframe of the server room. Inside, the scene was chaotic. The room was bathed in the strobing blue light of the server racks and the harsh red of the emergency floods. 3 of Karkaroff's men were already there. They weren't destroying the drives. They were ripping them out. They were stealing the crown jewels, the unencrypted list of every deep cover asset Sterling had compromised. Elena didn't announce herself. She fired. The confined space turned into a thunderbox. The first mercenary went down clutching his leg. The second spun around, firing wildly. Bullets sparked off the server stacks, sending showers of sparks and glass flying. Elena dove behind a heavy cooling unit. She tapped her comms. "Vane, they're in the server room. They're taking the drives." Vane's voice came back shrill and panicked. "Don't let them leave with those drives, Elena. If Karkaroff gets that data, he owns the intelligence community. Destroy them. Burn the room." Elena looked at the halon gas canister on the wall. If she triggered it here in this enclosed space without a mask, she would suffocate alongside them. She popped up, firing a suppression burst to keep the Russians pinned. "I can't burn it without killing myself." "Where are you?" "I'm at the submersible bay on the lower deck. Get down here. We have 3 minutes before the ship rolls over." The third Russian, a man with a scar running through his left eyebrow, pulled a grenade from his vest. He yelled something in Russian that translated to, "For the motherland," and pulled the pin. He wasn't trying to kill Elena. He was trying to blow the bulkhead to create an exit route for his team. "Down!" Elena screamed to no one but herself. She curled into a ball behind the steel unit. The explosion was deafening. The shockwave rattled her teeth and momentarily stunned her. The blast blew the door off its hinges and ruptured the water mains running through the ceiling. Freezing water began to spray down, mixing with the sparks. Elena shook her head, clearing the ringing in her ears. She looked over the cooling unit. The grenade thrower was dead caught in his own blast. The other 2 were dragging a heavy metallic case, the hard drives, toward the jagged hole the grenade had made. She raised her rifle. She had a clean shot at the man holding the case, but she hesitated. In that split second, a thought crystallized in her mind, a thought that had been nagging her since she read the files in Vane's office. Why was Vane so desperate for this data? He claimed he wanted to destroy Sterling's network. But if Vane possessed the list of compromised agents, he wouldn't just be a hero. He would be the most powerful information broker on the planet. He could blackmail the CIA, MI6, and the FSB. Vane didn't want to burn the empire. He wanted to inherit it. Elena lowered her aim. She didn't shoot the Russian. She shot the case. She emptied the magazine into the metal box. The armor-piercing rounds punched through the casing, shattering the delicate platters inside. The data, the leverage, the blackmail, the lives of 1,000 spies disintegrated into metal shards. The Russian screamed in fury, dropping the useless box. He raised his weapon, but the ship lurched violently. The stern dipped lower. The water in the room was now waist-deep. The Russians abandoned the fight. They weren't paid enough to drown. They scrambled out the hole, diving into the dark ocean outside. Elena dropped the empty rifle. She was alone. The water was rising fast, cold and black, swirling with oil and debris. "Elena," Vane's voice crackled in her ear. "Did you get the drives?" Elena waded toward the door, fighting the current. "The drives are gone, Sebastian. Nobody gets them." There was a long silence on the line. Then Vane's voice returned. It was no longer panicked. It was icy. "You stupid, self-righteous woman. You have no idea what you just threw away." "I'm coming to the sub-bay," Elena said, grabbing a railing to hoist herself up the tilted corridor. "Don't bother," Vane said. Click. The line went dead. Elena froze. She realized what had just happened. He wasn't waiting for her. She scrambled up the corridor, her boots slipping on the wet steel. She reached the stairwell to the lower deck. It was already submerged. She pulled open the heavy, watertight door to the garage bay. She was just in time to see it. The Triton Vane's personal escape submersible was detaching from the hull. Through the reinforced glass of the airlock, she saw Sebastian Vane sitting in the pilot's seat. He looked at her. He raised a hand in a mock salute. Then the clamps released. The sub dropped into the black water and vanished. He had left her to drown. The obsidian groaned a sound like a dying whale. The lights flickered and died. Evelyn was in total darkness, trapped in the belly of a sinking ship with the Atlantic Ocean pouring in to claim her. But Sebastian Vane had made one critical error. He forgot that before she was a widow, and before she was a spy, Elena Vance was a survivor. She didn't panic. She reached into her tactical vest and pulled out a glow stick. She cracked it, bathing the corridor in eerie green light. She knew the schematics of the G650 yacht class. There was a secondary escape route. The crew launch. It was on the bow, 3 decks up. The ship was tilting stern down, meaning the bow was rising into the air. It was a vertical climb. Elena began to run. She climbed hand over hand up the railings of the grand staircase, her muscles screaming. Furniture tumbled past her, grand piano, statues, tables crashing into the rising water below. She reached the upper deck. The angle was almost 45 degrees. She smashed the glass of the emergency exit with the butt of her pistol and crawled out onto the exterior deck. The wind howled. The rain lashed her face. The obsidian was perpendicular to the water now, like a tombstone marking its own grave. 50 feet below, the dark waves churned, but bobbing in the water, untethered by the explosion, was a solitary yellow zodiac raft. Elena took a breath. She didn't look back. She jumped. The impact with the water knocked the wind out of her. The cold was paralyzing. She kicked upward, breaking the surface, gasping for air. She swam through the debris field, dodging floating cushions and pieces of hull. She reached the Zodiac. She hauled herself over the rubber side, collapsing onto the floor of the raft. She watched as the obsidian gave one final shudder and slipped beneath the waves. The whirlpool dragged down the wreckage, then silence. Just the sound of the wind and the rain. Elena Vance was alive. But she had nothing. No evidence. No money. No identity. Or so Vane thought. She reached into her waterproof boot and pulled out a small vacuum-sealed pouch. Inside was not a hard drive. It was a micro SD card. She hadn't lied to Vane about the drives being destroyed, but she had lied about one thing. Before she shot the case, she had slotted the master key card out of the server rack. She didn't have the list of agents. She had something better. She had Vane's personal communication logs. She laid back in the raft, staring up at the stormy sky. "Your move, Sebastian." The Mediterranean Sea. November 17th, the night of the sinking. The silence of the ocean is the heaviest sound on earth. For 3 hours there was nothing but the rhythmic slap of black water against the rubber sides of the yellow Zodiac raft. Elena Vance, the woman the world knew as Evelyn Cross, lay curled in the bottom of the small vessel, shivering violently. Hypothermia was setting in. The adrenaline that had carried her up the flooding stairwell of the Obsidian and off the deck into the churning sea had evaporated, leaving behind a bone-deep cold. She wasn't thinking about revenge. She wasn't thinking about the billions of dollars at stake. She was thinking about survival. She had no flare gun, no radio, just a glow stick that was slowly fading and a micro SD card tucked into the lining of her boot. At 4:00 a.m. Salvation arrived not as a Coast Guard helicopter, but as a rusty fishing trawler running illegal nets off the coast of Corsica. The crew, suspicious and rough, pulled her aboard. They didn't ask for a passport. They didn't ask for a name. They asked for payment. Elena gave them the diamond studs from her ears worth 30,000 pounds traded for a wool blanket, a bowl of fish stew, and silence. She was dropped off at a commercial port in Marseille 2 days later. She was a ghost. No digital footprint. No credit cards. To the world, Evelyn Cross had drowned when Sebastian Vane's yacht was attacked by pirates. She had nothing but the micro SD card. And that was enough. Manhattan, New York. 3 months later. If you want to know what absolute power looks like, you didn't have to look at the White House or the Kremlin. You just had to look at the penthouse office of Vane Systems on Fifth Avenue. It was a fortress of glass, steel, and silence hovering 60 stories above the chaos of New York City. Sebastian Vane stood by the floor-to-ceiling window looking down at Central Park, which looked like a dark rectangular patch in the glittering grid of the city. He took a sip of Louis XIII cognac. It tasted like victory. The last 90 days had been the most profitable quarter in his company's history. The pirate attack story had held up. The media had painted him as a tragic hero, the billionaire who tried to save the persecuted widow only to lose her to the cruel sea. The sympathy had softened his corporate image. The stock price had doubled. With Sterling dead and his reputation in tatters, Vane Systems had absorbed the market share. He was now the undisputed king of global logistics and private intelligence. He turned back to his desk. It was a slab of black marble devoid of clutter save for his secure terminal in a single tablet. Or at least it was supposed to be devoid of clutter. Vane frowned. Resting squarely in the center of the black marble was a thick manila envelope. He checked the door. It was closed. His executive assistant, a woman named Sarah who was vetted by the NSA, had left for the night an hour ago. The security logs showed no entries. The biometric scanners on the elevators hadn't triggered. A cold prickle of unease ran down his spine. He walked to the desk, the crystal glass of cognac trembling slightly in his hand. There was no return address, no stamp, just his name, Sebastian, handwritten in black ink. He set the glass down. He picked up the envelope. It felt light but stiff. He slid a silver letter opener under the flap and sliced it open. He pulled out the contents. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't a chemical agent. It was something far more destructive. It was a photograph. 8x10 high-resolution glossy. Vane stared at the image and the air left his lungs as if he'd been punched in the solar plexus. The photo was taken from a high angle, likely a pinhole camera hidden in the molding of a ceiling. The location was unmistakable. The study of Sterling Manor. The timestamp in the corner read May 14th, 11:48 p.m. The night of the murder. The prosecution's timeline had been wrong. The defense's timeline had been wrong. The photo showed Alistair Sterling alive, sitting in his leather armchair, looking up in surprise. Standing over him, handing him the glass of scotch that would kill him, was not Evelyn Cross. It was a woman with long dark hair, her face twisted in a rictus of tearful rage. Beatrice Sterling, Alistair's own daughter. The grieving child who had sat in the front row of the trial weeping for the cameras. But that wasn't what made Vane's knees buckle. In the background of the photo, standing in the shadows of the bookshelves, watching the transaction with arms crossed and a cold, satisfied expression, was a man. Sebastian Vane. He remembered that night. He remembered how easy it had been to manipulate Beatrice. She was weak, drug-addicted, and hated her father for cutting off her trust fund. All Vane had to do was provide the arsenic, whisper the plan, and promise to take care of her once the Ice Widow took the fall. He had been there to ensure she went through with it. He had been the architect of the patricide. He dropped the photo. It fluttered to the desk, landing face up, an indictment in high definition. How the cameras. Evelyn Elena must have bugged the study months before the murder. When she claimed she had destroyed the drives on the yacht, she had lied. She hadn't just saved the communication logs. She had the cloud backup keys to every surveillance device she had ever planted. He reached into the envelope again. There was a note. It was written on thick, cream-colored cardstock. The handwriting was elegant, sharp, and terrifyingly familiar. Dear Sebastian, you were right about one thing. The cage is golden, but the air is poisonous. I thought you should know that I didn't send this to you alone. Copies have been delivered to the District Attorney of New York, the Director of the FBI, and Harrison Peel at the Washington Post. The metadata has been verified. The audio files of you coaching Beatrice on how to mix the poison are already uploaded to a secure server that went public 5 minutes ago. Check the window. E. Vane scrambled backward, his expensive Italian shoes slipping on the plush carpet. He ran to the window. Below on Fifth Avenue, the normal flow of yellow taxis and black town cars had stopped. The street was awash in a chaotic sea of flashing red and blue lights. It wasn't just a patrol car. It was a siege. Armored NYPD trucks were blocking the intersection. Unmarked federal SUVs were mounting the curb. He could see the tiny figures of a SWAT team moving in formation toward the lobby doors of his building. His phone began to ring. It was the secure line, the one only the board of directors used. He ignored it. Then his cell phone rang. It was Beatrice Sterling. He stared at the screen. She was probably screaming, probably being handcuffed right now in her London townhouse, realizing that the billionaire who promised to protect her had failed. He backed away from the window. The walls of the penthouse, once a symbol of his dominion over the world, now felt like the walls of a cell. He had framed an innocent woman, faked a pirate attack, and murdered a rival, all to build an empire that had just been dismantled by a ghost with a micro SD card. Sebastian Vane poured himself another drink. He didn't drink it. He just sat in his leather chair waiting for the elevator doors to open, waiting for the end. 2 weeks later, the Plaza Dorrego in the San Telmo neighborhood of Buenos Aires was alive with the Sunday market. The air smelled of grilled chorizo, roasted peanuts, and old paper. Tango music drifted from a nearby dance hall, melancholic and sweet. At a small rusted iron table in the corner of a sidewalk cafe, a woman sat alone. She looked different. The severe blonde bob of Evelyn Cross was gone, replaced by a soft, shoulder-length cut, dyed a rich chestnut brown. The tactical gear of Elena Vance was replaced by a simple white linen dress and oversized sunglasses. She took a sip of her cortado and unfolded a copy of the International Herald Tribune. The headline took up the entire top half of the front page: Fall of the Titans, Vane and Sterling heiress charged in Murder of the Century. The article detailed the raid on Vane Systems. It mentioned the bombshell release of audio recordings where Vane was heard instructing Beatrice Sterling on the precise dosage of arsenic needed to induce heart failure. It spoke of the vindication of Evelyn Cross, the Ice Widow, who was now presumed dead, a tragic victim of a corporate war. The woman lowered the paper. A slight, enigmatic smile touched her lips. She wasn't a widow. She wasn't a spy. She wasn't a victim. For the first time in 10 years, she was just herself. She had no millions in the bank. Vane had frozen the accounts before he fell. She had no title, but she had the one thing she had been fighting for since the beginning. She had her life back. A waiter in a white apron approached the table balancing a tray of sparkling water. "Is everything to your liking, señora?" he asked in Spanish. She looked up at him. Her eyes were clear, no longer scanning for exits, no longer assessing threats. They were just eyes reflecting the warm Argentine sun. "Yes," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "Everything is perfect." The waiter pulled a small notepad from his apron. "I am closing out the tabs for the shift change. What name should I put on the receipt?" She paused for a fraction of a second. She thought about Evelyn Cross, the woman who walked out of the Old Bailey without a word. She thought about Elena Vance, the woman who jumped off a sinking yacht into the Black Ocean. She let them both go. "Alice," she said. "My name is Alice." She placed a few bills on the table, enough for the coffee and a generous tip, and stood up. She picked up her woven bag, adjusted her sunglasses, and stepped into the crowd. She walked with the rhythm of the tango music blending into the stream of tourists and locals, disappearing into the vibrant color of the city. She didn't look back. There was no need. The past was dead, buried at the bottom of the Mediterranean. Alice kept walking, finally, truly free. And that is where the file ends. The world thinks Evelyn Cross lies at the bottom of the sea, a tragic figure in a game of billionaires. But we know the truth. She didn't just survive the game. She flipped the board. She proved that in a world of surveillance and high-tech warfare, the most dangerous weapon is still a person with nothing left to lose and the patience to wait for the perfect shot. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to like this video. It really helps the channel grow. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the world's most unbelievable true stories. And tell me in the comments, do you think Alice should have kept the money, or was freedom the ultimate prize? I'll see you in the next one.
The invitation was thick, creamy, and cold as a tombstone. It wasn't just an invitation, it was a summons. Marcus Thorne, the billionaire who had built an empire on the ashes of their marriage, was inviting his ex-wife, Sarah, to his baby shower. He wanted a ghost at his feast. He wanted to parade her, the struggling artist he'd left behind, as a trophy of his victory. He wanted to show the world his ultimate prize, a new wife, a new baby, and a life she had failed to secure. He thought she was broken. He thought she had nothing. But Sarah came, and she brought a secret that would burn his perfect world to the ground. The rain hammered against the single pane of glass in Sarah Collins's small studio apartment, the sound a dull, familiar percussion against the smell of turpentine and drying oil paint. This was her world. Canvases stacked against the wall, sketches pinned in a chaotic cloud above her desk, and a three-legged cat named Gus sleeping on a pile of old sweaters. It was a life built from salvaged pieces, a life she'd fought for. It was hers. Then the mail slot clattered. Among the bills and bodega flyers was an envelope that didn't belong. It was square, impossibly thick, and heavy as a paperweight. The cardstock was a creamy, opulent white, her name and address written in sharp, precise calligraphy that looked like spun ink. There was no return address. There didn't need to be. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The seal wasn't wax. It was a small, custom-debossed silver emblem, the logo of Cortex Dynamics, Marcus's company. Inside, the words glittered, literally, silver foil embedded in the card. Marcus Thorne and Isabel Thorne request the pleasure of your company at a celebration for their coming child. A baby shower. Not just a baby shower, but a celebration. It was to be held at the Apex Room, a venue on the 90th floor of a skyscraper that hadn't even existed when she'd last seen him. Sarah sank onto her worn velvet stool, the invitation feeling cold, almost damp in her hands. It had been 6.5 years. 6.5 years since she had walked out of his sterile, half-empty condo with nothing but a backpack and a secret that was just beginning to stir inside her. He had been Marcus then, driven, brilliant, and starting to become someone she didn't recognize. Now he was Marcus Thorne, a name synonymous with disruptive tech, ruthless acquisitions, and a net worth that defied comprehension. "Why?" she whispered to the empty room. The answer was immediate, and it soured her stomach. This wasn't an olive branch. It was a weapon. It was a summons to court, where she would be the star witness for her own failure. He wanted her to see Isabel, the young, beautiful model she'd been replaced with, to see the glittering life he had built, to see him, the victor. He wanted to parade her as the woman who had bet on the wrong horse, the fool who had walked away from it all. He was confirming his narrative, "I won, you lost." A small noise came from the alcove that served as a bedroom. "Mommy, is it thunder?" Sarah's entire posture softened, the tension draining from her shoulders, replaced by a fierce, protective instinct that was as automatic as breathing. Leo sat up in his small bed, his dark hair a mess, his eyes wide. He was 6, and he had his father's eyes. The eyes Marcus used to have, curious, bright, and quick to smile. "No, sweetie, just rain. Go back to sleep for a bit." "Okay." He burrowed back under the quilt she had sewn for him, asleep again in seconds. Sarah looked from her son, her brilliant, funny, kind-hearted boy, to the obscene invitation in her hand. This was why she had left. She hadn't been running from Marcus's potential success. She had been running from his suffocating ambition, from the man who was beginning to value things over people. She had been protecting the small, fragile life growing inside her from a world that would have seen him as a legacy, an heir, a brand asset, anything but a child. She had failed, according to Marcus's world. She taught part-time art classes at a community center. She sold the occasional painting at a local co-op. She was, by every metric Marcus Thorne valued, a complete and utter nobody. He expected her to decline, to hide, to reply with a bitter, misspelled email that he could show to his new, perfect friends as proof of her irrelevance. He expected her to be too broken, too proud, or too poor to show her face. She picked up her phone. She went to the event website listed on the card, a grotesque display of wealth with a photo gallery of Marcus and a glowing Isabel. Sarah's finger hovered over the RSVP button. Her entire life she had been defined against him. The one who left. The one who gave up. The crazy ex-wife. He had controlled that story for 6 years. "No more," she said softly. She wasn't the failure he'd painted. She was a survivor. She was a mother. And she was, quite suddenly, tired of being his ghost. She would go. Not for him. Not even, really, for herself. She would go to show him that his world of glass and steel had no power over her. She would go to close the door, not as the girl who had fled, but as the woman who had built a life he couldn't even begin to understand. She typed her name, Sarah Collins. She clicked, confirm. Marcus Thorne's penthouse apartment was 8,000 square feet of weaponized silence. The floors were polished obsidian, the furniture was minimalist and Italian, and the 20-foot-tall, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park like a king's map. Everything was automated, sterile, and cold. Marcus stood by the window, not looking at the view, but at his own faint reflection. He was on a call, his voice clipped and devoid of emotion. "No, the valuation is soft. Break them. I want the algorithm, not their team. Liquidate the rest by Monday. I don't care what it takes." He ended the call without saying goodbye and tossed the wafer-thin phone onto a marble slab of a table. Was that really necessary on a Saturday? Isabel emerged from the bedroom, her hand resting on the perfect pronounced swell of her stomach. She was 24, a decade younger than Marcus, and wore white cashmere loungewear that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. She was beautiful, but there was a permanent, nervous tightness around her eyes. It's just business, Izzy. He walked over and kissed her forehead, a gesture that was more possessive than affectionate. It's what pays for all this. He motioned to the apartment, the park, the city itself. I know, it's just the party. It's so much, Marcus, and your mother is driving the planners insane. It's not a party, it's a statement, he said, turning back to the window. It's for our son. He deserves the best. Isabel hesitated, tracing the rim of a glass. Speaking of the party, I looked at the RSVP list again. Are you sure about this? Marcus knew exactly who she meant. It's fine, Izzy. It's just closure. Closure? Marcus, you hate her. The way you talk about her, you describe her like a traitor. A flicker of something dark crossed Marcus's face. She was. She left me right when Cortex was about to launch. She had no faith. She said I was chasing ghosts. She walked out on me. And you walked into $1 billion valuation 6 months later, Isabel finished, the story a familiar one. You won. Exactly, I won. His voice was flat. Then why invite her? Why do you need her to see it? Isabel asked, her voice small, touching on a truth he refused to acknowledge. He turned on her, his charm suddenly, frighteningly gone. I don't need her to see it. I invited her because I'm not a petty man. I'm extending grace. I'm showing her that I've moved on, that I'm happy, that we are happy. He put his hand on her belly, his touch proprietary. This is my family now. This is my legacy. Isabel visibly recoiled from his tone, but nodded, subsiding. She was a good wife. She was a beautiful asset. She didn't challenge him. Not like Sarah did. He'd almost laughed when the RSVP came through. Confirmed. The audacity, the stupidity of her. What did she think she was going to do? Walk into his world in her paint-stained jeans and her righteous, infuriating poverty? He needed this. He wouldn't admit it to Isabel or even to himself, but the core of his ambition wasn't just to build, it was to disprove. Sarah's leaving was the one single mark in his loss column. She had been the only person to ever look him in the eye and say, "No, what you're becoming, I don't want it." It was a judgment he'd never been able to erase. So he would rewrite it. He would bring her into his world, the world she'd been too short-sighted to imagine. He would drown her in his success. He would stand beside his young, fertile, perfect wife, and he would watch Sarah's face as she realized exactly what she had given up. He would parade her as a failure, a ghost at the feast, and as she watched him celebrate his new son, his heir, she would finally understand. He wasn't the man who had lost her. He was the man who had everything. The RSVP confirmation was an act of defiance. The reality of it set in 2 days later. The celebration was in 4 days. It was black tie. Sarah stood in front of her closet, which was a collection of flannel shirts, denim overalls, and 2 slightly too formal bridesmaid dresses from a life before Leo. She laughed, a short, bitter sound. Black tie. He'd done that on purpose. It was the first barrier to entry. "What are you gonna do?" Her friend Jenna, a sculptor who lived down the hall, was perched on Sarah's counter, nursing a mug of tea. "You can't go, Sarah. It's a trap. It's not a baby shower. It's a public execution. Your execution." "I know," Sarah said, pulling out a faded maroon dress and wincing. "But I'm so tired of hiding from him. I'm tired of letting him be this boogeyman who controls the story. He thinks I'm living in squalor, pining for him. He thinks I'm a failure." "You're not a failure. You're an amazing mom and a brilliant artist." "Tell that to my bank account," Sarah muttered, "and tell that to him. He won't lose until I'm standing in front of him and he sees that his money and his power mean nothing to me." "So you'll go in, what, this?" Jenna tugged on the bridesmaid dress. "I don't know." Sarah felt the first crack in her resolve. This was stupid. It was a game she couldn't win. He had limitless resources. She had integrity. As Marcus himself used to say, integrity is just a fancy word for not having a better offer. God, he'd become a monster. "Okay," Jenna said, jumping off the counter. "If you're going to do this, you're doing it right. We're not letting you walk in there looking like Cinderella before the magic. We're going to Beacon's Closet." Beacon's Closet was a high-end consignment shop in Brooklyn, a graveyard for last season's designer labels. Sarah had $84 in her non-essentials checking account until her next teaching check. 2 hours later, she was standing in a cramped dressing room, having tried on a dozen dresses that were too flashy, too young, or too Isabel. "No, sir, I'm telling you," Jenna said, pulling something from the rack. "Not sexy, not rich, just you. You're not there to compete. You're there to observe." She handed over a dress on a wooden hanger. It was simple, a deep midnight blue silk that fell in a clean line. It had long sleeves, a modest boat neck, and a cut that was timeless. It wasn't trying to be anything. It was just beautiful. Sarah slipped it on. It fit perfectly. It was the armor she'd been looking for. It was $65. "That's the one," Jenna said, her voice soft. "You look formidable." The next hurdle, the gift. The registry, linked on the event website, was a horror show. A $4,000 cashmere-lined stroller. A $1,200 silver rattle from Tiffany's. A baby's first portfolio starter kit. "I'm not buying them a gift," Sarah said, horrified. "You have to," Jenna argued. "You show up empty-handed. You prove his point, that you're bitter, that you're less than." Sarah went home, the blue dress in a simple bag. She sat at her drafting table while Leo slept, the rain starting up again. What do you give the man who has everything, and the woman who helped him get it? She thought back to the man she'd loved, before Cortex, before the penthouse. The man who'd come to her tiny pre-Leo apartment after a 20-hour coding binge, his eyes red, and had her sit and sketch with him just to remember what real things feel like. She pulled out a fresh, leather-bound sketchbook, the kind with thick, creamy paper she rarely splurged on for herself. She opened it to the first page. She took a piece of willow charcoal and in 10 minutes completed a single, flawless drawing. It wasn't of them, it wasn't of a baby. It was a single ancient oak tree, its roots digging deep into the ground, complex and tangled, but powerful. It was a drawing of stability, of age, of grounding. It was everything his glass and steel world was not. She left the rest of the pages blank. She wrapped it in simple brown paper and twine. It was a gift that was entirely, painfully her. It was a memory he had abandoned. It was the perfect, silent rebuttal. The apex room was less a room and more a slice of the sky. Sarah stepped out of the private elevator and was immediately assaulted. The sheer scale of it was disorienting. The windows were 3 stories tall, and the lights of Manhattan glittered below them like a carpet of fallen stars. The theme, grotesquely, was a starry night, not the Van Gogh, but a literal celestial nursery. Clouds of white gypsophila and orchids hung from the ceiling. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Waiters in tuxedos offered champagne and caviar blinis. And the people. They were a different species. The women were tall, sculpted, and draped in effortless-looking silk. The men wore bespoke suits, their quiet confidence the unmistakable musk of new, predatory money. Sarah, in her $65 consignment dress, felt her armor crack. She was a rowboat in an ocean of yachts. She saw them immediately. Marcus and Isabel, holding court by a literal ice sculpture of a stork. Isabel was radiant, her pregnancy making her glow, her hand linked with Marcus's. And Marcus. He looked like a king. He was leaner than she remembered, his suit perfect, his smile wide and white. Then he saw her. His smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened. A flash of pure, cold triumph. He'd done it. The fly had entered the spider's web. He murmured something to Isabel and began to walk toward Sarah, cutting a path through the crowd. This was it, the moment. He was going to greet her, to publicly anoint her as his past, his failure. "Sarah," he said, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone she barely recognized. "I am absolutely flawed. You came." "Marcus!" She kept her voice even, her hands loosely at her side, not clutching her bag. "It was quite an invitation. Congratulations to you both. You look well." "I am well, Sarah. Life has been," he paused, glancing around the room, "generous." The implication was clear. Life has been generous to me, not so much to you. Isabel drifted over, her smile nervous but sweet. "Sarah, I'm Isabel. It's so brave of you to come." Brave. The word hung there. The word you use for a make-a-wish child. "Isabel, a pleasure. You're glowing," Sarah said, and she meant it. The woman was luminous and trapped. "Can I get you a drink?" Marcus said, his hand lightly on Isabel's back, a gesture of ownership. "Or let me introduce you to some old friends. You remember David Crum? He runs our European division now. And Cynthia, she's our head of acquisitions." He was doing it. He was parading her. He steered her, not touching, but willing her with his presence toward a small knot of people she vaguely recognized from their early days. Their faces, once open and friendly, were now tight with pity. They were Team Marcus. "Look who it is," Marcus announced, his voice booming with false bonhomie. "Sarah Collins. She made it out of Brooklyn." The polite, cold laughter that followed was the sound Sarah had been dreading. This was the humiliation. "Hello, David, Cynthia," Sarah said, nodding politely, refusing to be drawn into his game. "It's been a long time." "Sarah, wow, you look good," David stammered, his eyes flicking to her simple dress, then to Marcus's tailored suit. "She's still painting," Marcus said, answering for her. He put a confiding hand on David's shoulder. "Still living the dream. We're so proud of her, aren't we?" The condescension was so thick Sarah could barely breathe. He was portraying her as a quaint, tragic hobbyist. She was his court jester. "Something like that," Sarah said, her voice quiet. She could feel Marcus's frustration. She wasn't crying. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't giving him the scene he craved, the breakdown that would validate his victory. She was just there. A quiet, midnight blue shadow in his glittering, sterile world. "Well," he said, his smile tightening, "we're just so glad you could be here to see all this." "I am too, Marcus," she said, looking him dead in the eye. "It's exactly as I imagined it." The gift table was a monument to excess. It was piled high with boxes in pastel colors from brands Sarah only knew from magazines. There were silver spoons, designer diaper bags, and at least 3 strollers that cost more than her car. This was the next part of the gauntlet. Sarah walked over, holding her small brown paper-wrapped package. As she approached, Marcus's mother, Eleonora Thorne, materialized at her side. Eleonora was a woman who seemed carved from ice, her pearls as real as her disdain. She had hated Sarah, had seen her as a distraction from Marcus's destiny. "Sarah, my goodness," Eleonora said, her voice a low, aristocratic drawl. "I truly didn't think Marcus was serious." "Hello, Eleonora. You look lovely as always." Eleonora's eyes flicked to the simple package in Sarah's hand. "Oh dear, did you get lost on the way to the registry? I'm sure one of the staff can help you find it." "This is fine," Sarah said, placing her gift on the corner of the table. It looked absurd, a single brown leaf on a mountain of plastic-wrapped snow. A few people nearby glanced over, their whispers barely concealed. "How quaint," a woman in a Chanel suit murmured to her friend. This was the moment Marcus had been waiting for. He'd been watching her, and now he strode over, Isabel in tow, a look of performative curiosity on his face. "What's this?" he said, picking up the small, light package. He didn't have to fake the derision in his voice. No, let me guess. Is it one of your paintings? A little finger painting for the baby?" The small group laughed. Isabel looked at the floor, her hand on her stomach, a faint blush of shame on her cheeks. "It's a sketchbook, Marcus," Sarah said, her voice clear and carrying in the sudden hush. He laughed. "A sketchbook. Izzy, look. Sarah brought us a sketchbook." He held it up as if it were a dirty diaper. Still the struggling artist. "God, I love it." Some things really, truly never change. This was it, the public execution. The laughter was tight and cruel. He was winning. Sarah stood still for a beat, letting the silence settle. Then she spoke, her voice not loud, but cutting. "You're wrong, Marcus," she said. His smile faltered. "Excuse me?" "Some things do change," she said, her gaze unwavering. "You, for example. You used to love my quaint drawings. You used to say they were the only real thing you owned. You used to sit on the floor of my apartment, terrified you wouldn't get funding, and you told me my art was the only thing that kept you grounded." The silence was no longer laughing. It was electric. "You told me," she continued, "that if you ever became the kind of man who lived in a glass tower and forgot what the ground felt like, I should, and I quote, take you down a peg." Marcus's face had gone from triumphant to ashen. He was no longer a king. He was just a man being reminded of a promise he'd broken. You have no right," he hissed, his voice low. "I'm just delivering on that promise, Marcus." She gestured to the sketchbook he was still holding, his knuckles white. "It's a tree, with roots, in case you forgot what they look like." She turned, not to him, but to his wife. "Congratulations again, Isabel. I wish you all the best." She turned and walked away, not toward the exit, but toward the balcony, leaving Marcus standing there, clutching her failure of a gift, his face a mask of incandescent rage. The crowd, sensing blood in the water, quickly and quietly dispersed. He had lost control. The narrative was no longer his. Sarah stepped onto the glass-enclosed balcony, the city air 90 stories up, feeling thin and cold. Her heart was hammering, a painful, frantic bird in her chest. She had done it. She had said the thing. She had wiped the smug, victorious look off his face. She leaned against the railing, the vertigo of the height matching the vertigo in her head. She had come to close a door, but she'd just kicked it open. The door to the balcony slid open behind her. She didn't turn, assuming it was a waiter, or worse, Marcus, coming to finish the fight. "That was cruel." The voice was soft and uncertain. It was Isabel. Sarah turned, surprised. Isabel stood there alone, wrapping her arms around her cashmere shawl. She looked small against the vast, dark skyline. "What he did to you, I mean," Isabel clarified. "In there, with the gift. That was cruel." Sarah studied her. The perfect, polished wife. The victim of her own victory. "He hasn't changed," Sarah said, her voice flat. "He just has more expensive toys." "He told me you left him because you didn't believe in him," Isabel said, moving to stand a few feet away, her eyes on the city, not on Sarah. "He said you were afraid of his success, that you wanted a small life." "A small life?" Sarah almost laughed. "No, I wanted a real one. I wasn't afraid of his success, Isabel. I was afraid of him. I was afraid of the man he was becoming, the man who just humiliated his ex-wife at a party to impress a room full of people he doesn't even like." Isabel was quiet for a long time. The only sound was the distant, endless hum of the city below. "He's obsessed with you," Isabel said, so softly Sarah barely heard it. "What?" "He's obsessed. He talks about you. Not often, but when he does, it's not normal. It's not how a man talks about someone he's over. He's not just building an empire, Sarah. He's building it at you. He's been in a 6-year argument with a ghost." Isabel finally turned to look at her, and Sarah saw with a jolt that she wasn't nervous. She was analytical. This girl wasn't just a pretty face. She was a survivor, too. "This whole party, this baby, I thought it was for us. A fresh start," Isabel whispered, her hand going to her belly. "But it's not, is it? It's just his final move, the checkmate, to prove to you that he'd won." Sarah looked at this young woman, trapped in a golden cage that was still under construction, and felt an unexpected, unwelcome pang of pity. "A fresh start is the one thing he can't afford, Isabel," Sarah said gently. "It doesn't look good for the brand." Isabel's eyes filled with tears, which she angrily brushed away. "I opened your gift. After he... You opened it? In the bathroom. I had to see. The drawing, it's beautiful. She took a shaky breath. He's not the man you drew, is he? He's the man who would laugh at it. He's both, Sarah said. That's the tragedy. Isabel looked back toward the party, her face hardening with a resolve that mirrored Sarah's own hours earlier. I think I have a lot to think about. She turned to go, then paused. He won't let this go, Sarah. What you did, you should leave. He's not just an egomaniac. He's vindictive. I know, Sarah said. I'm just waiting for the elevators. Isabel nodded, then slipped back inside, a ghost returning to her own feast. Sarah walked back into the main room, her head held high. The atmosphere had shifted. The air of polite, bored celebration was gone, replaced with a tense, hungry silence. People were whispering, their eyes darting from Marcus, who was standing near the bar, downing a scotch, his back rigid, to her. She had become the center of gravity. She wanted nothing more than to be home, in her cluttered, safe apartment with Leo. She headed for the bank of private elevators, her steps measured. She was almost there. You! His voice was a razor. Marcus was in front of her, blocking her path. He'd moved with a speed that was predatory. His charm was gone. This was the man from the boardroom, the man who broke companies. His face was pale, his eyes burning. Marcus, let me pass. What was that? He hissed, keeping his voice low, but the venom was potent. What the hell was that, Sarah? You think you can waltz in here into my life and poison my wife, humiliate me in front of my friends? You invited me, Marcus, or did you forget? I believe the words were, parade me as a failure. Your mother was more direct. You bitch. The word was a slap. You just had to come, didn't you? You couldn't stand it. You had to see what you gave up. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in. Sarah didn't flinch, but her voice went icy. Let go of me. Look at this, Sarah, he snarled, his gesture wild, encompassing the room, the view, the life. This is what you walked away from. This, and for what? Your pathetic little drawings, your simple life. You are a failure, Sarah. You walked away with nothing. The word hung in the air between them. Nothing. The years of scraping by, the fear, the solitude, the fierce, desperate love. It all coalesced into a single clarifying point of light. Sarah looked at his hand on her arm, then back to his face. She spoke, her voice completely calm, completely devoid of the rage that was consuming him. I don't have nothing, Marcus. Oh, right. Your integrity, he sneered, finally letting go, as if her skin burned him. You can't pay rent with integrity, sweetheart. I have a son. He froze. The sneer faltered. What? You remarried? So fast? He was grasping, trying to find a new way to win, to frame this. Who's the unlucky father? Some starving poet in your building? Sarah just looked at him. She watched the billionaire, the genius, the titan of industry, as he completely missed the truth. He's 6 years old, Marcus, she said, her voice cutting through his toxic fog. He blinked. The math, slow and terrible, began to dawn on his face. 6. No, we've been... His name is Leo. Marcus was shaking his head, a jerky, panicked motion. No, you're lying. He has your eyes, Sarah said, her voice breaking just once. The eyes you used to have, before all this. He stumbled back, physically struck by the revelation. 6 years. They had broken up 6.5 years ago. No, he whispered. You're trying to... What? Get money? Is that it? After all this time? You're coming for money? That was the final insult. That was the only language he understood. I've never taken a dime from you. I never will, she said, her own anger finally surfacing, cold and pure. I didn't want a dime from you, Marcus. That's why I left. That's why I never told you. You kept him? From me? The narcissism was so profound, his sense of victimhood so absolute, he still couldn't see. I didn't keep him from you, Marcus. I kept him safe. I didn't want my son to be this. She gestured to the room. To be a pawn in your game, to be a brand asset or a legacy. I wanted him to be a person. I wanted him to be able to paint and to be kind and to laugh. I wanted him to have a soul, and I was terrified of what you would turn him into. He was speechless. All the air had left his lungs. The foundation of his world, the story of her betrayal, had just been pulverized. She hadn't left him because she didn't believe in him. She had left him because she was pregnant, and she had chosen her child's soul over his ambition. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had inverted. He, the man with everything, was the one who had nothing. She, the failure, had the only thing that had ever mattered. The elevator chimed. It was open. "Goodbye, Marcus." She stepped in, and as the silver doors slid shut, the last thing she saw was the hollow, shattered expression of a man who had just lost a war he never even knew he was fighting. The elevator's descent was silent. Sarah walked out of the sterile lobby and into the cold, chaotic, beautifully real New York night. She hailed a cab, her hand steady. She got in, and as the cab crossed the bridge, leaving the glittering, toxic spires of Manhattan behind, she finally cried. It wasn't a cry of sadness. It was a pressure valve releasing 6 years of terror, of solitude, of a secret held so tightly it had become part of her bones. It was a cry of release. She was free. Back on the 90th floor, the party was dying. It had bled out in seconds. The whispers were no longer whispers. They were a panicked hum. People were leaving, their faces a mask of shock and delicious scandal. Marcus was gone. He had fled. Isabel found him in his penthouse study. The door was locked, but she had the code. He hadn't just fled the party, he'd fled his life. The room was destroyed. A $50,000 monitor was smashed on the floor. Books had been swept from shelves. A glass award, Innovator of the Year, was in 1,000 pieces. He was sitting on the floor amid the wreckage, his back against the cold glass window, his bespoke suit ruined. He was just staring. "Marcus?" He didn't look up. A son. His voice was a rasp. "My son." "I heard," Isabel said, her voice cold. She felt no pity, only a clarifying Arctic rage. "The elevators are in an alcove, but the acoustics, everyone heard, Marcus. They heard everything. She kept him from me. She protected him from you," Isabel corrected, her voice sharp. "She protected him from this, from the man who would invite her to his baby shower just to laugh at her gift." He finally looked up, his eyes broken. You're on her side?" "I'm on my side," Isabel said, and for the first time she felt her own power. "I'm on the side of my child, the one in my belly, the one I, God help me, am about to bring into this theater." "Izzy, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "But it's true, isn't it?" she pressed, kneeling in front of him, forcing him to see her. "The man she described, the man who trades souls. Who did you trade, Marcus, to get all this? Was it hers? Was it yours?" She placed a hand on her own stomach. "Was it ours?" He had no answer. He just buried his face in his hands. The entire narrative of his life was a lie. He wasn't the victor. He was the fool. He had spent 6 years building a monument to his own ego, while the only part of him that mattered, his own child, was growing up in a small apartment in Brooklyn, being raised by the only woman who had ever had the courage to tell him the truth. He had won the world, and in doing so, he had lost his son. Isabel stood up. "My driver is waiting. I'm going to my sister's." "Izzy, wait. Don't do this." "It's already done, Marcus," she said, looking down at the broken man amid the wreckage of his perfect, empty life. "You wanted to show Sarah what she'd lost. Well, she did. And now, so have you." She walked out, leaving him alone with the ghosts he'd been chasing and the new one he'd just found. A month passed. The rain had turned to a light, hesitant snow. Sarah's apartment was warm. Leo was at her small kitchen table, diligently drawing a picture of a blue dragon. Gus, the cat, was purring on his lap. The story had, of course, exploded. The Post and the blogs had had a field day. Thorne's secret son, Billionaire's baby mama drama. Sarah had been hounded by paparazzi for a week. She'd disconnected her phone, locked her door, and hidden. Her face had been everywhere. But just as quickly, the world had moved on. A new scandal. A new IPO. She had heard nothing from Marcus. The silence was, in its own way, a relief. Then there was a knock. Not a reporter's bang, but a soft, hesitant rap. Sarah's heart jumped. She looked through the peephole. It was Isabel. She opened the door. Isabel looked different. She wasn't glowing. She was pale, dressed in simple jeans and a parka, her hair in a simple ponytail. She was no longer a billionaire's wife. She was just a pregnant young woman. "Hi," Isabel said. Can I come in?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded, stepping aside. Isabel's eyes swept the apartment, not with disdain, but with a kind of wonder. She saw the stacks of canvases, the messy, happy clutter. She saw Leo, who looked up. "Hi, I'm Leo. Who are you?" Isabel's breath caught. She smiled, a real, trembling smile. "Hi, Leo. I'm Isabel. I'm a friend of your mom's." "Oh, okay." He went back to his dragon. "Coffee?" Sarah offered, her voice tight. "Please." Sarah busied herself at the counter, her back to Isabel. "I left him," Isabel said quietly, as if continuing a conversation. "That night. I'm staying with my sister in Queens. My lawyers are talking to his lawyers. It's a mess." "I'm sorry," Sarah said, and she meant it. "Don't be. You saved me. You saved me, and this," she said, touching her belly. "I was going to be his next trophy. Now I'm just going to be a mom." She sipped the coffee. "He's not well, Sarah. Marcus, he's gone. He stepped down from Cortex. The board forced him out after the scandal. He sold his shares. I don't know where he is. Montana, maybe." "Good," Sarah said, her voice hard. He did one thing, though, before he disappeared." Isabel slid a thick envelope across the counter. It wasn't from Marcus. It was from a law firm. "It's a trust, Sarah, for Leo. It's astronomical. It's not tied to Marcus's main accounts. He set it up anonymously through a dozen shell companies, but my lawyer found it. It's irrevocable. It's just for Leo. No strings, no custody battle, no contact." Sarah stared at the envelope, her hands shaking. "And he left this for me at my sister's with a note," Isabel said. She pulled something else from her bag. It was the sketchbook. Tucked inside the cover was a single folded sheet of his old, heavy cream letterhead. Not Cortex Dynamics letterhead, just Marcus Thorne. His handwriting, which she'd once known better than her own, was messy, almost illegible. "I remember the tree, I'm sorry." That was it. It wasn't a happy ending. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a reunion. It was a reckoning. He wasn't fixed. He was a man who had burned his own world down. But in the ashes, he'd done one right, selfless thing. He had given his son a future, and he had given Sarah her freedom. Sarah looked at the sketchbook, at the legal documents. Leo could go to any college. He could travel. He would never, ever have to struggle the way she had. She didn't win. He didn't win. Leo did. She looked at Leo, who was now explaining the dragon's powers to the cat. She looked at Isabel, who was watching them with a sad, knowing smile. Two mothers, survivors of the same shipwreck. Sarah picked up the legal documents and, without opening them, put them in a drawer. She put the sketchbook on her desk. She smiled at Isabel. "Want to see how to draw a dragon?" She was no longer a failure. She was no longer a ghost. She was just Sarah, and she was finally, beautifully free. She came, she saw, and she conquered. Sarah proved that a failure, in the eyes of the world, can be the greatest kind of success. The bonds of a mother's love and the quiet strength of integrity are a fortune that no billionaire can ever buy. What did you think of Marcus's final act? Was it redemption or just one last act of control? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more emotional stories that remind us what's truly valuable.